Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It is called McDuff Lives, and thanks for joining me here for a Friday chat. It's Friday chat number 20, which means I've been doing this for quite some time, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to just chat with folks and to take questions that maybe I wasn't able to take earlier in the week, especially with our guests, because when I have somebody like Riley or Professor Hamamoto, uh, Mark Kulak, David, so many of the great guests we've had with Protect the Nest, the three ladies, Carol, Amber, and Tara, that I want to just take a little bit of time to see if anybody has anything to follow up from the questions that we had. And as we're kind of wrapping up the week, I wanted to just get back to this book that I've never really done a show on it, and I think I should because of the importance of this incident, the Liberty. The name of the book is Remember the Liberty, Almost Sunk by Treason on the High Seas by Philip F. Nelson. And as folks are gathering for the show, I think I'll just take the liberty of reading a a bit from the foreword to this book. This book was published in 2017, the 50th anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty by the Israeli Air Force. And it's an incident that really should help people define, where did the deep state take over? And my answer is it was Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson, the first deep state president, after the coup and the assassination of President Kennedy, was not just a change in the name of the person who sits in the White House. It was much more than that. It was a coup, a change in government, a removal of our constitutionally elected president by treason. And a great example of treason is in the story of the Liberty. Hi, Charles. Glad you're here. I know you are probably somebody who has followed this story closely. And I'm just going to read Ray McGovern's forward here and start from there. Treachery at Sea. And he begins with a quote of a famous poem, which he then adapts, I should say. What is so rare as a day in June? How the sap creeps up and the blossoms swell. We may shut our eyes, but we cannot help knowing the murder of sailors who that day fell. The sap's cover-up is no longer going to hide U.S. government cowardice. That is the adaptation of James Russell Lowell's poem by Ray McGovern, the great retired CIA analyst who contributes a great deal right now to preserving our liberty. And you should hear his speech or his remarks at the Schiller Conference this past Wednesday, exposing the blacklisting process and how treasonous it is to participate in such a thing. Well, anyway, let's get back to Ray McGovern's words from 2017. The poet had no way of knowing how rare a day June 8th, 1967 would be. And let me start off by saying this. McDuff, my dad, his operation, TDY, described by Doug Valentine in his book TDY, that was going on about the same time. Interesting. And, my dad would have been intimately familiar with the details of the attack on the Liberty. And certainly one of the things that people like his boss at the time, Admiral Thomas Moorer, were reviled against. And, so you have, again, somebody like my dad who is confronted by a horrible thing like the dope selling to American servicemen in Vietnam, courtesy of the CIA's friends in Laos. That's a horrible thing to discover, but also the story of the USS Liberty. That should wake anybody up. And for some reason, it's just not kept current. So let's do our part and pay some attention to what happened on June the 8th, 1967. Indeed, even today, scandalously few Americans have heard of the deliberate Israeli attack on the USS Liberty that day, because the cowardly U.S. political, military, and media establishment have managed to hide what happened. No one important wanted to challenge Israel's lame, quote, oops, mistake excuse. Intercepted Israeli communications show beyond doubt it was no mistake. Chief Petty Officer J.Q. Tony Hart, who monitored conversations between then Defense Secretary Robert McNamara and Sixth Fleet Carrier Division Commander Rear Admiral Lawrence Geis, Geis, reported McNamara's instructive reply to Geis, who had protested the order to recall the U.S. warplanes on their way to engage those attacking the Liberty. McNamara, quote, President Johnson is not going to go to war or embarrass an American ally over a few sailors, unquote. Well, there's your treason right there in clear, stark, black and white words from President Johnson. And if you don't understand, from the incidents surrounding President Kennedy's death, that President Johnson was well aware of the assassination. Whether he specifically knew the details before it happened, I kind of doubt, but that it was going to happen, he knew, and that it did happen, he knew the details enough to know that he was not a legitimate president of the United States. He covered it up. He committed the fraud that takes away the legitimacy of the transaction when he supposedly took the oath on that airplane with his buddy winking at him at the time. So it's something that the United States of America has refused to face, refused to look it in the eye and say, that was treason. But until we do, we're never going to unpack all the layers. I was listening to the speakers at the Schiller Institute's press conference on Wednesday. And the thing that is lacking is an understanding that these things happen, these assassinations of Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, these things happen because it was allowed to happen by the people that took over the government on November 22nd, 1963. And that's the story of the Liberty. Sorry, I'm not reading much from what Ray McGovern said, because I do have a lot to say myself. So continuing from the foreword by Ray McGovern, the late Admiral Thomas Moorer, after interviewing the commanders of the U.S. aircraft carriers America and Saratoga, confirmed that McNamara ordered the aircraft back to their carriers. Moorer called it, quote, The most disgraceful act I witnessed in my entire military career, unquote. And let's just remember that it was Admiral Thomas Moorer that signed the recommendation for my father's final award from the Office of Secretary of Defense, the Meritorious Civilian Service Award. And that puts my father squarely in the Thomas Moorer camp with regard to the comments we just read concerning President Johnson did on June 8th, 1967, was treason. Thanks to this book, those who care about such things can learn what actually happened 50 years ago. One, on June 8th, 1967, Israel attempted to sink the U.S. Navy intelligence collection ship USS Liberty and leave no survivors. The attack came by aircraft and torpedo boat in full daylight in international waters during the 6-day Israeli-Arab War. 2. The U.S. cover-up taught the Israelis that they could literally get away with murder. They killed 34 U.S. sailors and wounded more than 170 others. Imagine how my dad felt about that after the kamikaze attack on his ship killed 133 of his fellow sailors and wounded hundreds more. And to see a president of the United States let it happen. Let it happen. Number 3, as a part of an unconscionable government cover-up, the Navy threatened to court-martial and imprison any survivor who so much as told his wife what had actually happened. In parentheses, McGovern says this incidentally put steroids to the PTSD suffered by many of the survivors, unquote. And doesn't that make sense too with people like my family? You know, those of us that have an idea of what went on are, yeah, we're suffering from that post-traumatic stress. The only investigation worth the name was led by Admiral Moorer, who had been chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He led a blue ribbon independent commission to examine what happened to the Liberty. Among the findings announced by the commission on October 22nd, 2003, quote, unmarked Israeli aircraft dropped napalm canisters on the USS Liberty bridge and fired 30-millimeter cannon and rockets into the ship. Survivors estimate 30 or more sorties were flown over the ship by a minimum of 12 attacking Israeli planes. The torpedo boat attack involved not only the firing of torpedoes, but machine gunning of Liberty's firefighters and stretcher bearers. The Israeli torpedo boats later returned to machine gun at close range 3 of the Liberty's life rafts that had been lowered into the water by survivors to rescue the most seriously wounded. That was a quote from Admiral Moorer, my father's boss. Shortly before he died in February 2004, Admiral Moorer strongly appealed for the truth to be brought out and pointedly directed at what he saw as the main obstacle. Quote, I've never seen a president stand up to Israel. If the American people understood what a grip these people have on our government, they would rise up in arms, unquote. Pardon me. So is that clear enough? You know, when we talk about McDuff, we talk about McDuff, we talk about him as the person who is supposed to clean up the mess after uh, the play Macbeth is over and to restore rightful government. And to find that in this book there is another reference to Macduff, which I need to read to you now. And I'm not going to read the rest of Ray McGovern. I want to skip now to the next part called Preface, and this is by Edgar F. Tatro, Tatro. And if you keep Macduff in mind as I read this, I think you'll hear what I'm saying between the lines. Call the following slice of testimony what you will: an epiphany, a resolution, a confession, a warning. It does not matter to my lost soul, my lost spirit. The almighty apparitions known to you as configurations reminiscent of an armed head, a bloody infant, and a crowned child bearing a tiny tree in addition to their macabre underlings, that trio of haggard, bearded mistresses of fickle destiny, those wretched immortal pranksters who have sealed my miserable and eternal existence, have granted me the opportunity, through a spiritual medium, to unburden my conscience, as it were, regarding past deeds of direst cruelty. Some have suspected my witting complicity, but it is apparently time to confirm those allegations for the human historical record. Perhaps those condescending mortals who ride now as I did then will benefit from my errors and flaws and sins, although I doubt it. It was I who was in attendance for all the decisions, the debaucheries, the murders. It was I who participated in the slaying of my kinsman, my king, and my guest. It was I who mirrored the path of the floating dagger. It was I who thrust the blades of the innocent chamberlains into Duncan's unprotected bosom, sending him, a most pleasant, albeit naive sovereign, into another realm of surrealism. It was I who secured the deepest gash across Banquo's astonished throat. It was I who administered most of the 20 mortal lacerations to his gory cranium and face, while those incompetent peasants frittered away their lone chance to prevent Fleance's future reign in Scotland. Yes, it was I who was also responsible for the immediate and inglorious demise of Macduff's issues, his noble wife, and all the loyal servants of Fife. I even ensured the death of those conniving spies, paid through my auspices, but residing within his castle at my behest, to prevent the release of unnecessary accounts for a future time. I am the guilty one, drenched in blood, caked with the remnants of decayed flesh from innocent and unsuspecting victims, cousins, friends, patriots, women, babies. I am the evil perpetrator, inundated with the stench of death on my hands and royal robes, soiled for all the ages by foolhardy temptation. I am the quintessence of betrayal, the crowning metaphor for man's ultimate hypocrisies. I have been dubbed through history as a mystery man, a hired killer, and a master cutthroat of peerless distinction, a record marred only by Fleance's narrow escape. I am known to all as Banquo's third murderer, but let it be revealed to the heavens and the inferno and all other regions of existence that I was the Thane of Glamis, I was the Thane of Cawdor, I was the usurper of Scotland, I was the fool of the universe, that arrogant, headless patch who sacrificed his good name as gallant warrior, who betrayed his reputation as a loyal subject to the rightful king, who slaughtered all those who loved and admired him, who listened to the fates which toyed with his own self-deceiving flaws of greed, who could not fathom the paradoxes and oxymorons laid before him, who envisioned the weird sisters as riddle makers without a concerted purpose to their diabolical premonitions and plots, who foolishly misinterpreted figurative truths as literal hyperbole, who blinded himself to the concept of a moving grove and a corpse's shell as a fertile mother, who obliterated his nobility, his integrity, his pride, and his legacy for one brief, temporary moment of mindless celebration and power, a contemptuous fragment of fallacious futility. I was the third murderer. I was Macbeth. So, remember the liberty. I think I'll leave that subject there because you can explore it. There are YouTubes, and there is a group of survivors, some still active, alive, and trying their best to obtain recognition and at least some compensation for their families of those that died. It is a national shame, and it began with Lyndon Baines Johnson. Well, I don't think that we can simply say Israel is the root of all evil, but I do think that Israel acted against, the United States in a violent military attack against one of our obviously marked ships, and that they did have the intent of murdering every single sailor on the ship. And we didn't do anything about it, and we never have done anything about it. Well, it doesn't mean that Lyndon Johnson is a puppet of Israel. It does mean that Israel and Lyndon Johnson are both being pulled by the same strings, though. And there's where I think we need to just keep on focusing not on national enemies, not on military enemies, but on the banks and the elite noble families that own the banks, and the elite aristocratic families, and the elite gentry families from the United States, ones that got promoted into a sense of nobility, perhaps by being awarded a knighthood by the Pope, a papal knighthood, the Order of St. Gregory, or some other really high ranking award from the Pope that gives you a sense that, not only are you going to heaven, but you got a pretty good of a free pass between now and the time that you do get to heaven. Of course, the old noble orders, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, the White Russians, the people with titles that no longer represent any location or any particular wealth, but simply keep the titles. Because one day, maybe, if everything goes right, they'll get their titles reinvigorated with some new land as a result of their loyalty to what still goes on behind the scenes, trying to destroy the remnants of our democracy. And I say democracy intentionally because I know that there is a knee-jerk reaction on many people's parts to say, no, 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 we're not a democracy. We're a republic. And I say, well, fine. You can use your words you want the way you want to, and I'll use my words the way I want to. But I'm not going to change my way of talking just to please your rather narrow definition. Well, let me say hello. Hello to Charlotte Bierman, Corky Goss, DJ, Harry, Jason, Tom, Core. Everything's a rich man trick. Uh, Pat Andler, good morning to you. And Mobster, thanks for writing out Thomas Moore's name in case people want to look him up. I've spoken a lot about him and uh, his colleagues. They were, you know, not a bunch of perfect, you know, Democrats. They were old school Republican types, but they were for individual freedom. They were for the Bill of Rights. And this is where we have the big distinction now between the traditional military attitude of preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States versus the present attitude, which is, well, we're going to have to suspend some of these, quote, rights, unquote, because of a greater national security interest. And we're very sorry that you are not going to be able to exercise your freedoms according to the Bill of Rights, but we have more important business on our minds, just like Lyndon Johnson had more important business on his mind than to stop Israel from murdering U.S. naval personnel. Well, I'll just check a couple of your comments here. Harry Harkonnen, you're absolutely right. There are mercenary armies in America right now. If you've got to be aware of that, and this has got to be one of the most frightening facts to understand. That this has been going on ever since World War II. Operation Gladio is the European version. What do you want to call the American version, where they're bringing in all of these people on these, uh, you know, paperclip-like projects that aren't really paperclip? This is where I think we absolutely have to keep pushing on my dad's story to find out what happened to his files. Where did the files go? The 68,000 files, that he was ordered to create a filtering system. He had 20 some people working for him, including special agents and secretaries, uh, going through reviewing 68,000 applications in 1951, 52, 53 on the direct orders of J. Edgar Hoover. That was his business. And to the extent those people got into this country, that is where we have a problem because they are the killers, the ones that would massacre the Jews or the Roma or the Poles or the French or anyone that they thought might be communist. Those are the mechanical killers. And they are here in this country, everywhere, as a result of the way that Churchill and Truman and the Five Eyes, as we call them now, decided to deploy them. It's a deployment. It's not like they're refugees needing a place to live and just going to show up with a cardboard suitcase and a couple of kids. No, these people are mechanics. They are the mercenary killers that can be called upon by the dark hand if necessary or when they're ready. Eric Prince, yes, DJ, Eric Prince providing the Army to protect the Belton Road. Yeah. And I'm all for the Belton Road, but I'm all for individual rights first. So let's make a constitution for the Belton Road where everybody involved in the Belton Road has the benefit of the Bill of Rights of the US Constitution and fair judges and juries to decide these cases and not just an administrative process like the World Economic Forum wants us to accept. You've seen their administrative process when you've seen my YouTube channel getting taken down and the appeals getting denied, within 10 minutes, as if that wasn't an automatic process done completely by computers. To take our humanity away from us, they take away our ability to influence the government or to make judgments as juries are supposed to do. The way it is right now, you spend like 2 years getting ready for a jury trial. I speak from experience. And, you don't know for sure that your trial is going to start on that day because they always schedule more than they have time for, hoping that one or two will settle. And usually one or two does settle. And sometimes you get bumped, and you have to come back in 6 months or a year for your jury trial. And the time goes by and the witnesses may move or things change. You finally get to the trial. You have the trial, but then there's an appeals process or post-trial motions. Oh, there was an error. The judge made a mistake. Well, there goes another 6 months for the judge to rule on whether he made a mistake or not. And all of this procedural stuff dilutes and takes away the power that our Constitution gave to our existing jury system, the common law jury. So, Bill of Rights, fair, impartial judges, and jury trials. Then I might feel comfortable supporting a Belton Road. But right now, with Eric Prince making the decisions as to who lives and dies, and believe me, that's what happens when you're out there in the wilderness with guns. I'm not for it. I'm not for it. I love the technology. I love the idea of defeating the British Empire by, finally connecting Asia to Europe with a reasonable transportation system. It's not going to get, destroyed by World War I or the Crimean War or, the Middle East conflict, something that's going to be there for sure. But it has to have human rights. And right now, it looks pretty dim for human rights. Well, that hit me out of the blue. Donald Barr was Tom O'Loughlin's nemesis. That would, that's not obvious to me, Mobster. So I'd be glad to consider what you're saying. And I have not read Donald Barr's famous book that everybody else seems to have read. The idea of space. What do they call it? Space relations, right? Where there's all of this sexual exploitation, sexual violence against minors and children. I don't know, just don't want to read the book. It sounds gross. But this is where these people's minds are. It's all about exploitation and personal pleasure, as if that was what life is really about. And to impose that on, the young people of today, that's where I think it's so important to talk, to people who like our great trio, the protecting the nest ladies, who understand childbearing, child rearing, and how fragile a child is, and how they shouldn't be forced, to see things that really shouldn't be seen at that age, and to participate in discussion of sexuality before they've even approached puberty. This is a crime. This is cultural treason. Well, mobster, I want you to send me an email and tell me why you think Donald Barr was my dad's nemesis. I I respect your ability to put things together very much, and I really do want to hear that. Donald Barr gave the paperclips new identities. I didn't know that. Okay, interesting. Jeremy Roth Kushel, I welcome. Haven't run into you yet. I'm glad to have you here. Eric Prince was key back channel for Trump operation to the Kremlin via George Nader. Well, again, there's something that I can't say I can agree with because I don't know enough details. So if you want to provide, that would be great. And the comment section after the show is also good for more detailed stuff. I always read the comments. I know a lot of people don't, but I always do, and I always go back and read through the chat room too, because I know you guys have a lot of interesting comments and to add to help me understand things. I received a mail this morning from one of my subscribers who goes by uh, Dashite. I don't know if that's Dashite or Dashite, but he sent me a very interesting connection to the Shiksani Knights of Malta. And the claim in the article, which I haven't studied yet, but I do look forward to studying it, is that it connects Alan Dulles to, General Trudeau, Philip Corso, and the Shiksani Knights story. So those of you who know who those people are, and the fact that I've been studying those too for about a year now, I've been into that. Um, and by the way, if you want to study more about that, it's another good reason to study the book um, about Michael Golonyevsky. Um, what's the author's name? I wish I had it in front of me. I want to give you the name, but there's like three different books that have come out recently. This is the one that I read a lot of on the show. So maybe that will give you the reference. But in that book, um, author's first name is Kevin, I think. Um, you learn a lot about the Shiksheni Knights. Very interesting. So, and I know the name George Nader, but I do not remember. That was one of the names that George Webb was talking about back a couple years ago. I don't have the context though to go through that with you. Interesting. I wonder if Donald Barr knew who my dad was. They must be about the same age. Well, My big theme this morning, and I'm going to leave you with this, and I think I'll go ahead and wrap the show up. Just you can tell I've still got a little rasp in the voice, so I'll go ahead and rest it the rest of the day. Is this the assassination of President John F. Kennedy was not just an assassination, it was a coup d'etat. And when you consider that Lyndon Johnson was willing to allow this act of war against a U.S. Navy ship and the murder of its sailors and the maiming and destruction of their lives, the machine gunning of stretcher bearers and life rafts, the torpedo attack, at least 12 warplanes in numerous sorties. And you know that Israel was attacking you, me, every citizen of this country. And they knew they could get away with it because they knew that there was nothing that Lyndon Johnson could or would do about it. And so when the Joint Chiefs of Staff learned that the Sixth Fleet had sent warplanes to defend the USS Liberty, and President Johnson, through Secretary McNamara, who did his bidding and is also a shameful traitor, when they did that, then they showed the world that this was a coup, that the presidency no longer is run by the constitutional process of the republic that was created in 1787 with the Constitution. It's a different government, and the people behind it are not us. And no, they do not have the consent of the governed. And the governed are going to figure that out with your help. And I'm going to do my best to do my part as well.